us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at the new Erdogan. There was the one that was reviled by critics when there were this crackdown back in June on protests in Istanbul. This Monday, he unveiled a series of major reforms. In part one, we discussed some of them, changing the electoral law to allow more smaller parties, lifting a ban on headscarves for civil servants, and also we were just talking now with our panel about moves to support minority languages, including, of course, Kurdish, spoken by at least 15 million people inside of Turkey. We welcome back to this discussion EMRE DEMIR, editor of the French language edition of Turkish daily Zaman, Kendal NEZAN, president of the Kurdish Institute here in Paris, from Istanbul, historian Vehbi BAYSAN, who teaches at Yeditepe University, and Gianni, who's spent a lot of time for Brazilian weekly magazine CARTA Capital, following these stories. This issue now of whether or not it's going to be enough to kickstart those peace negotiations. There was a historic breakthrough, a ceasefire since the month of March. The leader of the PKK still in prison. Your thoughts? How much will this reform package go to bringing the two sides together, Gianni?
I would like to just make 3 quick points to answer your question, and I'll try to be very quick. The first one is the AKP is a conservative party. And regarding the language issue, my question is, why only in private schools the students can learn in Kurdish, in their mother tongue, and not in public schools? So you're not creating an egalitarian society here. You're creating a society divided society, like the country is currently. The second issue that worries me is that we haven't talked about this, but nothing has been said about the anti-terror legislation, which criminalizes Kurdish people, journalists, and politicians. And the third issue, why I think this is not enough, is that there's no talk about giving more autonomy to the Kurds. I mean, we're talking about something, a movement that has been taking place, led by the PKK for the last 3 decades. We're talking about 40,000 dead people, and nothing is being talked about giving more local autonomy to these people. So for me, these are the issues that make all these proposals not enough.
Not enough so far. On Twitter, this reaction: nobody believes that this package will reduce the tensions and produce a fruitful environment to solve problems about freedom. Let me get an answer here from EMRE DEMIR. Turkey, the country that jails the most journalists, more than China, more than Iran, a lot more, in fact. I believe the numbers are somewhere more than 60 and less than 80, depending on how you tabulate them. Is there any sign in these reforms that there's going to be a change in that regard?
No, not actually. There was a package much long waited about the detained journalists and the freedom of press, but Erdogan didn't announce these reforms. But the vice prime minister Bekir Bozdağ announced that will be some package of reforms will be announced in the next month about the freedom of press. So no, there is when we were discussing in part one, Vehbi BAYSAN was mentioning there were more things he would have liked to have seen in the reform packages. Vehbi, one of the ones that a lot of the press has been talking about is the largest religious minority in Turkey, the Alevis. The Alevis, who they were expecting a reform to allow their houses of worship to be recognized officially by the state. That hasn't happened so far. Do you think it will?
Well, eventually it will, because, I mean, I'm not a religious expert, but as a citizen of Turkey, I wouldn't be bothered if anybody prays in any place. So why is it still a debate in Turkey? You see, these things, that's why the reform package, I said that, you know, good, but not enough. Probably, I mean, soon we will see more and more because there is a public demand for these. For example, if Alawis opened up a Cem Evi, we call it like a gathering houses, and that is the way they want to pray. Why not? I mean, because even our Diyanet İşleri, the religious affairs institution within the government, they don't have a clear and sufficient answer for that. But I believe soon, because there is now a big building actually combining both Alawis and Sunnis, mosque for Alawis and the praying house, let me call it, for Alawis, and also a food distribution center. For me, it was a really great complex, bringing in two sides, and people actually, I believe, do not know much about each other. Therefore, probably they are reacting, and reactions only from, not only from Sunni side, you always find also from the Alevi side. But it was a great step with this complex. So these things are small steps, but eventually, probably, I don't know, within 5 years, maybe we won't be talking about these things. But I like
Wehbi,
to, I mean,
just explain for our viewers here, because back in December, the Turkish parliament released an official statement rejecting these houses of worship, these Cemevis, as you call them, and calling on Alevis to go to Sunni mosques, even though their brand of Islam, if I'm not mistaken, is closer to Shia Islam. Why is the government still regulating houses of worship?
No, I mean, they're not rejecting on a way. There are many places for Alevis to worship. But I think the major problem is that they do not get state recognition. And as a result, actually, they don't get in many places probably permission to open these ones. But I know in Istanbul there are, I'm not saying they're enough, but what I'm saying is it's not banned. So what Alevis want is an official acceptance by the government. Yes, you're absolutely right. Prime Minister Erdogan said if you want to worship, you can go elsewhere. But I think this is going to change, because whenever I speak with people of Sunni belief, which is majority in Turkey, I don't see, and when you speak with them one-to-one, actually this is not a major issue.
All right, and we have on Facebook somebody who supports the reforms, Gurkan, saying this democracy package includes many rights for minorities. The government has made decisions that have never been made before, and it all brings us back to the timing of all of this. It's happening in a context where the prime minister is in his final mandate. There's talk of him running for president this June. Though he showed a different face after 10 years in power, and the ensuing crackdown in Istanbul, which caught the world's attention. At the time, it was a not-so-conciliatory Prime Minister Erdogan who branded those protesters fringe terrorists.
Minorities are trying to rule over majority. Privileged are trying to dominate victims. And they're trying to regain their privileges. We know what's truly behind the dirty games that they play, as they pretend to care for trees, the environment, and Gezi Park.
So, which is the real Erdogan?
That's a really good question. I was extremely surprised because I started covering Turkey in 2002 when the AKP won the first elections. And I was very supportive of the Turkish model. And then I was very supportive of Erdogan, like many people, many leaders in the West, in the so-called international community. And when he said these things, when he started speaking like that, calling people on the streets as comparing them to terrorists, I was very shocked because I didn't expect this. I was pro-Erdogan, as I said. So I changed my mind. I'm very skeptical now about what he says, about the fact that he wants to create a presidential system because, as you said, this is his third mandate as a prime minister, and he wants to be president now. He wants to continue. I think the Turkish model did work. There was growth.
There still is.
There still is. There's still going to be growth. They're predicting 4%.
More than in France.
Much more than in France. So it was a positive model in many ways. But now there's other things that are coming to the surface, and he's dealing. He became a different person. I think he's being pressured by his electorate, the people who voted for him, who are more conservative, and I think he's trying to please both sides. He is a very proficient politician. He has chances of winning these elections as president, as Putin did in Russia. But I'm very disappointed because I did believe in this Turkish model.
All right, disappointed. And the question also being posed is Erdogan changing his tack as a lesson learned from these Gezi Park protests, from the pressure that came from abroad? There's a report by Amnesty International this Wednesday. We'll talk about it a bit more later on. Or is he more concerned about a potential rivalry from within his own camp? On Tuesday, the current president, Abdullah Gül, has been labeled as a possible future prime minister. So you'd have a Russia-style switch, I suppose. The difference being he seemed to attack Erdogan in his speech opening the session of parliament. We cannot view every issue, every debate in terms of black or white, justified or unjustified, us and them, or friend or foe. Clearly an attack on Erdogan, even though he didn't mention the prime minister's name. Is it pressure within his own ranks that's brought about these current reforms?
Yeah, well, there are some differences between Abdullah Gül and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, but I don't see an open clash between Gül and Erdogan. And the Gezi...
Those remarks, you don't see them as directed towards the prime minister?
They had always a different style in politics. It was the case 10 years ago. It is the case now. So I don't see a real clash between the two of them, between Abdullah Gül and Erdogan. And certainly Gezi created some pressure on Erdogan, but I still think this package of reforms, or these reform packages, is much more related to the Kurdish problem. The recent negotiations with the PKK and the effort to find a solution to the Kurdish problem. So I don't think that the Gezi incidents created so much effect on these packages of reform. So.
Do you agree, Kendal Nizam?
Well, there are differences of style. Mr. Abdullah Gül is more polite, is more inclusive, and Erdogan is rather a street leader.
But do you agree that it's a willingness to try to find a solution, a deal with the PKK that's really
I'm not sure of
concentrating the minds here for these reforms?
Well, I was hopeful, but I'm not very sure of that because of this package is really almost empty for the Kurds. Apart from very, very small steps like education in the private school, which means that parents should pay for the school of their children and pay a high price to get their children learn their own language, their own mother tongue. What is this system? Or nobody knew so far that some letters of the alphabet are forbidden, banned in Turkey. That's incredible. A country member of the Council of Europe, candidate to European Union so far, this letter used in the
in
for
Kurdish,
example, the English alphabet. We have W, Q. How do we say well? So they are banned in Turkey. So it's presented as a major step in solving the Kurdish issue. There is no way of solving.
So you don't think that he made that he's announced these reforms with an eye to trying to strike a deal with the PKK?
He has.
Why did he make these reforms?
He has a Kurdish constituency, very important Kurdish constituency. The AKP is the only Turkish party which has a Kurdish constituency. So he has to please them also, to give them a few arguments in the coming elections, telling that we did that during Atatürk or CHP time. All this was banned. So you will see in a few years everything will be settled. But it's not convincing enough. So expectations were very high because they started a dialogue with PKK, with Öcalan a few months ago, and people were expecting more. And the result is now very, very modest. So people are very much disappointed. Kurds are disappointed. Alevis are disappointed because we have a state which funds the Sunni version of Islam with a lot of several hundred thousands of mullahs and other people paid by the states. Mosques are paid by the state. And you have millions of Alevis which are excluded from any state funding, from any official recognition. So how can you speak about fairness, about justice? And for the Kurds, I already told that you have to be very fair. You cannot ask a confederal status for 200,000 Turks of Cyprus and not allow the Kurds of Turkey, 15, 18 million people, to learn their own mother tongue.
Right, but maybe we're at the beginning of a bargaining process.
Well, it is not even a beginning. It's nothing. It's just peanuts.
All right, Frank agrees with you. He says on Twitter, reforms of Erdogan in Turkey, which he calls historical, are marginal. Dozens of Kurds are still detained without a fair trial. Vehbi BAYSAN, what do you think is the real motivator behind these reforms?
Well, it seems, first of all, I think the Turkish economy is doing very well and for the last couple of years and continue, it seems, at least in the near future. Therefore, actually taking bigger steps actually possible. For example, our speakers would also remember, like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, in Kadıköy, gathering, I don't know, 50,000 Kurds and demonstrating would be kind of really a dangerous thing to do. So the acceptance is there. I'm not saying this is normal. But actually, there are many issues. For example, our speakers talking about the autonomy. I mean, where are you going to make the autonomy? Probably there are more Kurds living in greater cities than probably southeastern part of Turkey. And also, I'm sure, I mean, I fully support the educating children in their own languages. I'm not against it at all. But I have little concerns about it, whether we see them in Europe. For example, Turks in Germany, educated in their own languages, are often are not part of that society. So when you look at the
well, there's bilingual education that exists in lots of places in Europe, and in fact, even
I fully support. I'm not against it. I'm just that kind of having exclusive Kurdish schools. How is it going to work in the near future? I'm sure they have plans about it. I'm not against it. But for the timing being, I think these are actually, the package is very much sending, you may call it peanut in some places, but major in some other areas, that actually sending messages. For example, the university's name changed to Hacı Bektaşi Veli, giving some message to the Alevis, and also giving lands confiscated back in the past from the Assyrians in the eastern part of Turkey. This is message to these kind of minorities. And also, not in this package, but introduced Lazca, the northern dialect, now northern part of Turkey, that actually can be taught as an elective language. So, I mean, there are messages not only for Kurds, but other minorities. So that's why I see it as a good step towards, in my view, normalization. For example, the headscarf ban did not come with the announcement of Republic. I mean, it was in the late 1980s. At that time, I was in the university, that this was actually banned, depending on the, and also we should call it that these are the amendments to the 1982 constitution, which was made by the military. So headscarf ban came out of nowhere in the late 1980s. And many girls actually left school, university in their final year. There's nothing to support that. And later, actually, it's emerged a couple of years ago that there's nothing in the law kind of forcing this. So what I'm saying is that Turkey at a stage now, people getting out of their fears, one of which is that if the girls put headscarf, Turkey will be more Islamicized. How about the people in the parliament with their growing beards? I mean, why nobody's talking about men? I mean, I think it's important what in people's mind, not in their appearance.
Right,
so when it comes to Kurds, sorry.
I was going to say, on Twitter, we have agreement from one viewer who says there's no limit on how short a skirt can be, yet, quote, liberals don't like the lifting of the ban on headscarves. Of course, this conversation, the point made by Vehbi BAYSAN, Gianni CARTA, that the kind of conversation you can have in Turkey today, the number of demonstrators you can put in the street, not the same as it was a decade ago.
Definitely not. I've been going to Turkey, as I said, since started going to Turkey in 2002. And the beauty of being in a city like Istanbul, beautiful city, was to be able to live with all kinds of people. You know, you were in Europe, and that's obvious, but you were also in Asia. You felt like you were part of two worlds. And I have a lot of friends who don't wear the headscarf in Istanbul, in Turkey. And I think it has changed a lot. It's starting to change because, for instance, I have friends who tell me that there were no people wearing burqas some time ago, and this is a new thing. There's more and more people wearing burqas. So obviously there's a change, there's a shift here. And I think, I do believe, although, as I said, I admired Erdogan, what he had been doing before, I think he's incentivizing this to happen.
EMRE, DEMIR, many times we've had guests on this panel when we've been talking about Turkey who say, is Turkey more democratic than it was a decade ago? Yes. Is Turkey more democratic than it was 4 or 5 years ago? Not so sure. What are your thoughts when you hear that?
Well, it is true that the first term of the AK Party, AKP, it was a party with a reformist stance, and since the elections on 2011, it has a different stance now. We can say that, but we have to see about this reform package a very essential point. In the recent history of Turkey, in the modern history of Turkey, every reform about the fundamental rights was about an international conjecture. It was about the accession to European Union. It was about for the membership of the NATO, etc. But it's the first time that the people, the Turkish people, the Kurdish people, demanded the change, demanded a reform on the fundamental rights.
So it's domestic pressures, not foreign pressures, that push these reforms.
And I think it's the first time that we have an internal oppression that played a role about the fundamental rights. Before, it was always about the external oppression. It was always about the international institutions, and it's a very important step
for the country. I want to thank you. I want to thank EMRE, DEMIR. I also want to thank Kendal, NEZAN, Gianni, CARTA. We want to thank Vehbi, BAYSAN for joining us from Istanbul. Before we go, though, let's say hello to James Creedon. It's time for our Media Watch segment.
Evening, François. So we've been looking actually at another issue that's making international headlines today about Turkey. That's Amnesty International's report after the June protests in central Istanbul. Now, they're quite damning of Erdogan and the Turkish administration, the Turkish government's response, saying that there were human rights violations on a massive scale. Take a look at some of these pictures, François, because what you're going to see here is a video that was released by Amnesty International. Now, they talked to a number of people who were injured. This guy, for example, had his eye gouged out by police. He says that he had no role whatsoever in those protests. He was just going home from work. Another woman was hit by a plastic bullet randomly fired into crowds of protesters. A third man, who was a journalist by the name of Beychichi, said if he hadn't been shouting the fact that he was a journalist, he's convinced that the riot police who dragged him off could have killed him. And he says essentially that Erdogan owned up to the heavy-handed response. Let's take a listen to what he had to say to Amnesty International.
Bütün bu gezi olaylarında, gezi direnişinde devlet işkenceyi sokağa taşıdı. Hatta başbakan en üst düzeyde polise talimatı kim verdi diyorlar, ben verdim. Şimdi o bunu yapınca Çevik Kuvvet Şube Müdür Yardımcısı gelip senin basın kartına bakıp sökme hakkını kendinde buluyor. Onundan bir alt amir işte resimlerini silme, zorla alma, hatta vurma hakkını kendinde buluyor.
Okay, so we missed some of the subtitles there, François, but essentially what he was saying is that Erdogan owning up to that heavy-handed response allows the riot police and the whole way down, in fact, to feel like they can legitimately be heavy-handed, not just with journalists, but with the public. Now, if we look at today's Zaman, that's one of the English-language Turkish newspapers, interesting comments on
one that
there.
EMRE, DEMIR knows well.
That's right. On the comments section of that article, talking about it there, one says Amnesty International should first go and condemn the USA, Britain, and Australia for heavy-handed and bloody treatment of protesters in the Stop Wall Street protests. And his point is that they were much more peaceful protests and that the police were heavy-handed anyway. Elsewhere, you have this tweet coming from Egypt. If you call this brutal, then what would you call what happened in Egypt? That's, of course, the famous Rabia sign on that Twitter handle. So supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood, I think you'd probably call it more brutal. To answer that tweet.
James Creedon, I want to thank you.
Thanks, François.
Thanks to our panel. Thank you for being with us here for the France 24 debate.